The waters around Okinawa churned beneath gray morning skies on April 6, 1945. Task Force 58 of the United States Fifth Fleet spread across the East China Sea like a steel constellation. Dawn light revealed the massive formation that would soon face its greatest test. 16 miles ahead of the main fleet, radar picket destroyers held their lonely stations. These ships served as early warning sentinels. Their crews knew what approached from the north. In the Combat Information Center aboard USS Laffey, radar operators watched their screens with growing dread. The contacts weren't arriving in dozens. They came in hundreds. Gun crews throughout the destroyer loaded 5-inch shells marked with mysterious VT designations. Each shell contained miniaturized electronics that would change naval warfare forever. The sailors didn't fully understand the technology they wielded. They only knew these special shells might keep them alive. Operation Kikusui No. 1 was beginning. The first of 10 massive coordinated kamikaze assaults. At 600 hours, aircraft filled the eastern sky. Through the morning haze came a sound that would haunt survivors for decades. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft engines droned in synchronized waves. Sealed inside their cockpits sat pilots with no return tickets. Leading this aerial armada were members of the Imperial Japanese Navy's Special Attack Units. Zero fighters and Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bombers carried 250-kilogram bombs beneath their bellies. Behind them came waves of older aircraft pressed into suicide service. Among the attackers flew specially trained pilots in rocket-powered flying bombs called Oka. Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers carried these human missiles toward the American fleet. What unfolded next would prove the revolutionary impact of American proximity fuse technology. It would also reveal why kamikaze tactics, initially so devastating, would ultimately fail against the most sophisticated anti-aircraft system ever deployed. The American VT proximity fuse had reached the Pacific after 2 years of combat testing. That testing began with one historic shot. Development started through a crash program launched in 1940. Section T of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory led the effort under Dr. Merle Tuvey. The proximity fuse ranked among the 3 most critical secret projects of World War II. Only radar and the atomic bomb held equal importance. The fuse worked on brilliantly simple principles. A miniature radio transmitter and receiver sent out continuous radio waves. The system measured return frequency changes. When Doppler shift indicated proximity to a target, the fuse triggered automatic detonation. Gunners no longer needed to estimate exact distances. They didn't need to set mechanical timers. The shell knew when to explode. Technical challenges had been staggering beyond imagination. Components including tiny glass vacuum tubes manufactured by Sylvania had to survive acceleration forces of 20,000 times gravity. This happened when fired from 5-inch guns. The projectile reached 2,600 feet per second. It spun at 25,000 revolutions per minute through the gun's rifling. Every component had to function perfectly after this violent launch. Then it had to operate reliably in temperatures from 100 degrees to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. By April 1945, American factories had produced over 15 million proximity fuses for Pacific naval use. Manufacturing spread across multiple contractors. Crossley Corporation alone produced 506,913 fuses. That represented 24% of total production. RCA, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, and Magnavox combined with 87 different firms. They used 110 factories in various production phases. This massive industrial effort equipped American forces at Okinawa with the most advanced anti-aircraft ammunition ever created. The United States Navy had dramatically increased proximity fuse allocation. From 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition in 1943, the percentage rose to 75% by 1945. This shift recognized that Pacific theater combat against kamikaze attacks demanded revolutionary defensive capabilities. Every destroyer, cruiser, and battleship carried thousands of VT-fused 5-inch shells as primary defense against suicide attacks. Standing in stark contrast was the Japanese kamikaze program. Desperation had birthed this tactic. Following catastrophic defeats in the Marianas and the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japan had lost most experienced pilots and aircraft carriers. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet, proposed forming special attack units in October 1944. He argued that conventional tactics could no longer succeed against overwhelming American firepower. The kamikaze represented Japan's attempt to transform remaining inexperienced pilots into precision-guided weapons. The mathematics appeared favorable. Conventional attacks achieved hit rates of only 2% against heavily defended American ships. Early kamikaze attacks in the Philippines had achieved success rates exceeding 34%. A single pilot in a Zero fighter carrying a 250-kilogram bomb could potentially sink or cripple a destroyer. The trade seemed worthwhile. One life and one obsolete aircraft for hundreds of American casualties and millions of dollars in damaged warships. Kamikaze pilots underwent abbreviated training, emphasizing spiritual preparation over flying skills. Many had less than 100 hours flight time. Their predecessors at Pearl Harbor had averaged 500-plus hours. They learned basic navigation and ship recognition. Most critically, they mastered the final diving approach designed to evade anti-aircraft fire. The pilots wrote final letters and participated in ceremonial sake toasts. They received samurai swords or rising sun headbands before their missions. But spiritual preparation couldn't overcome the technological revolution they were about to encounter. The Oka suicide weapon represented the ultimate kamikaze concept. American sailors nicknamed it Baka, meaning fool. This piloted bomb carried a 1,200-kilogram warhead powered by 3 solid-fuel rocket motors. With maximum speed of 575 miles per hour in terminal dive, it was designed to be unstoppable once released. Yet its fatal weakness was range. Barely 10 miles meant vulnerable Betty bombers had to carry them directly into American defenses. The contrast in defensive philosophy was absolute. American ships at Okinawa deployed in concentric protection rings. Radar picket destroyers positioned to provide early warning bore the brunt of initial attacks. Each destroyer carried 12 to 16 5-inch guns capable of firing VT-fuse shells. This created overlapping fields of fire. The proximity fuse transformed these weapons from area denial systems into precision instruments. A 5-inch VT shell had a lethal burst radius of 70 feet. Conventional time-fused shells had only 20 feet. More critically, the fuse eliminated complex calculations required for conventional anti-aircraft fire. Gunners could engage targets immediately upon detection. The morning of April 6, 1945, would test these systems to their limits. Operation Kikusui No. 1 involved 391 Navy planes and 133 Army planes. Of these, 215 Navy planes and 82 Army planes were kamikazes. A total of 297 suicide aircraft in a single coordinated assault. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton of USS Laffey later described the approaching kamikaze waves. They resembled a swarm of bees heading for the only flower in the desert. The first wave struck at 0600 hours. Radar operators tracked over 50 aircraft approaching from the north. Picket destroyers opened fire at maximum range, 12,000 yards, with VT fuse shells. The proximity fuses proved devastatingly effective against the approaching formations. Each shell passing within lethal range of an aircraft automatically detonated. The sky filled with steel fragments. Unlike time-fused shells requiring precise range estimation, VT fuses turned near misses into kills. Within minutes, dozens of Japanese aircraft fell into the sea. Their suicide missions ended miles from intended targets. But the kamikazes kept coming. At 07:44 hours, USS Lafay came under concentrated attack. 22 aircraft attacked in 80 minutes. The destroyer's gunners fired 345 rounds of 5-inch VT ammunition. They destroyed 9 attackers outright. The proximity fuses allowed Lafay's guns to engage multiple targets simultaneously. They could switch rapidly between aircraft without delays required for fuse setting. When kamikaze pilots attempted their standard tactic of approaching at wavetop height to avoid radar detection, VT fuses proved equally effective. The shells detonated when passing close to the sea surface. This created walls of fragments that shredded low-flying aircraft. Despite this devastating defensive fire, Lafay was struck by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs. Yet she survived. This testified to both American damage control and the fact that proximity fuses had prevented many more attackers from reaching their target. The effectiveness of VT fuses was no accident. The technology had been secretly tested in combat since January 5, 1943. USS Helena fired the first proximity-fused shells in action off Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Red Cochran, commanding the after 5-inch battery, shot down a Japanese D-3A Val dive bomber. He used the second of 3 salvos. The shells had detonated without direct hits. They simply passed close enough to trigger the fuse and tear the aircraft apart with fragments. This single success validated 3 years of intensive development. That development had overcome seemingly insurmountable technical challenges. The fuse contained approximately 130 electronic components, miniaturized to fit in a space smaller than a pint milk bottle. All were manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. By the Okinawa campaign, post-battle analysis revealed the mathematical superiority of proximity-fused ammunition. Time-fused 5-inch shells required an average of 1,062 rounds to destroy each kamikaze. VT-fused shells reduced this to 310 rounds per kill. This represented a nearly 4-fold improvement in effectiveness. In optimal conditions, results were even more dramatic. The destroyer escort USS Abercrombie destroyed a kamikaze with just 2 VT rounds in May 1945. The destroyer USS Morrison, defending against a massive kamikaze attack on May 4th, shot down 8 attackers in minutes using proximity-fused ammunition. She was eventually overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was profound. Surviving kamikaze pilots who aborted their missions reported terrifying experiences. They described approaching American task forces through seemingly solid walls of exploding shells. The distinctive black puffs of VT explosions appeared with uncanny accuracy. It seemed as if American gunners could see exactly where each aircraft would be. Japanese tactical doctrine had assumed that high-speed, low-altitude approaches would minimize exposure to anti-aircraft fire. The proximity fuse invalidated these assumptions entirely. Shells that would have missed by 50 feet with conventional fuses now detonated lethally close. The final approach became a gauntlet of precisely timed explosions. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, directing kamikaze operations from Kyushu, noted in his diary the increasingly devastating effectiveness of American anti-aircraft defenses. By late April 1945, Japanese naval intelligence estimated that fewer than 1 in 4 kamikaze aircraft were reaching their targets. This compared to 1 in 3 during the Philippines campaign. The difference was primarily attributed to what Japanese reports described as new-type anti-aircraft shells that seemed to explode with impossible accuracy. Ugaki wrote, "The enemy's defensive firepower has increased remarkably. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at distances we previously considered safe. Individual American sailors operating 5-inch guns with VT ammunition became legends within their task forces." On the destroyer USS Hugh W. Hadley, during the May 11th attack, gun crews claimed 17 confirmed kamikaze kills using proximity-fused ammunition. The gunners developed a technique of leading kamikaze aircraft with continuous fire. This created a wall of VT explosions that attacking aircraft had to fly through. Gun crews could fire 15 rounds per minute. Each shell was equipped with its own electronic brain-seeking targets. During one 52-minute period, Hugh W. Hadley's guns destroyed multiple kamikazes in succession. The proximity fuses ensured that even shells passing above or below rapidly maneuvering aircraft would detonate effectively. The story of USS Aaron Ward during the May 3rd attacks illustrates the proximity fuse's role as a force multiplier. When 40 kamikaze aircraft attacked the destroyer, her 5-inch batteries fired continuously for 52 minutes. VT-fused shells destroyed 6 attackers completely. They damaged 5 others severely enough that they crashed into the sea. Commander William Sanders later testified that, without proximity fuses, his ship would have been overwhelmed in the first 10 minutes. The ability to engage targets without precise range finding allowed Aaron Ward's guns to shift rapidly between multiple threats. This was impossible with time-fused ammunition. These accounts multiplied across the entire fleet. During the 10 major Kikusui operations from April 6 to June 22, 1945, Japanese forces launched approximately 1,900 aircraft in organized kamikaze attacks. American naval forces, primarily using VT-fused 5-inch shells, destroyed hundreds of these attackers before they could reach their targets. Statistics from the Operations Research Group showed that ships equipped with proximity-fused ammunition were 3 times more likely to survive concentrated kamikaze attacks. This compared to those relying primarily on conventional ammunition. The proximity fuse had transformed what should have been a catastrophic tactical innovation into a costly but manageable threat. The disparity in technological adaptation became apparent as the campaign progressed. American forces continuously refined their proximity fuse tactics. They discovered that VT shells were particularly effective when fired in patterns creating overlapping spheres of fragments. Ships began coordinating their fire to create these VT boxes, through which kamikaze aircraft had to fly. The Japanese, meanwhile, could only respond with tactical variations. Dawn attacks, multi-axis approaches, mixing conventional and suicide aircraft. None could overcome the fundamental advantage of shells that knew when to explode. Production statistics told the story of industrial warfare at its apex. By June 1945, American factories were producing 70,000 proximity fuses per day. The entire war effort would see over 22 million proximity fuses manufactured. The cost exceeded $1 billion in 1940s currency. That's roughly $15 billion in today's dollars. Crosley Corporation alone employed 10,000 workers across 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Each fuse cost had dropped from $732 in 1942 to just $18 by 1945 through mass production efficiencies. This massive investment proved worthwhile when Navy analysis indicated that proximity fuses prevented the loss of dozens of ships during the Okinawa campaign alone. Japanese industrial capacity, devastated by strategic bombing and resource shortages, could produce nothing comparable. While Japanese scientists understood the proximity fuse concept, German reports on Allied special ammunition had reached Japan via submarine. They lacked the industrial infrastructure to develop and mass-produce such sophisticated devices. The vacuum tube technology alone required precision manufacturing capabilities that Japan's war-ravaged industry could not achieve. Japanese radar development, critical for understanding proximity fuse principles, remained primitive compared to American systems. The Type 22 radar, Japan's most advanced naval set, operated at wavelengths that made miniaturization impossible, even if manufacturing capacity had existed. The effectiveness of proximity fuses influenced Japanese tactical doctrine in the campaign's later stages. By May 1945, kamikaze pilots were instructed to approach American task forces at maximum altitude before diving vertically onto targets. They hoped to minimize exposure to VT-fused anti-aircraft fire. This tactical adjustment, while reducing losses during approach, made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Ships could maneuver out of the dive path. The high-altitude approach gave radar operators more time to track incoming aircraft. The attempted solution proved counterproductive. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commander of amphibious forces at Okinawa, credited proximity fuses with making the invasion possible. In a letter to the Chief of Naval Operations, Turner wrote, "Without the VT fuse, our losses from suicide attacks would have been unbearable. The Japanese kamikaze was a formidable weapon that could have changed the outcome of the Pacific War, if not for our technological superiority in anti-aircraft defense." His assessment was echoed by Admiral Mark Mitcher, whose flagship USS Bunker Hill survived a devastating kamikaze strike on May 11th. This was partly because proximity-fused fire destroyed 3 other attackers that would have finished the crippled carrier. Admiral Arleigh Burke, Mitcher's chief of staff, later recalled the effectiveness of proximity fuses during a 1978 interview. "When I went as chief of staff to Admiral Mitcher, who commanded the fast carrier task forces, all the 5-inch 38 and 5-inch 25 ammunition was fitted with VT fuses. As you well know, those fuses knocked down enemy planes by the dozens. Had it not been for those fuses, our ship losses and casualties in the fast carriers in the last half of the war would have been enormously larger." The proximity fuse's impact extended beyond mere statistics. The technology fundamentally altered the morale equation that made kamikaze tactics viable. Japanese military doctrine assumed that the certainty of death for their pilots would be balanced by near certainty of hitting enemy ships. When success rates dropped below 20% due to proximity-fused defenses, the exchange became unsustainable, even by the brutal calculus of suicide warfare. Young Japanese pilots, many of them university students drafted into special attack units, began to understand that their deaths would likely achieve nothing. Letters recovered after the war revealed growing awareness among kamikaze pilots that American defenses had evolved beyond what their commanders had promised. Lieutenant Yukio Seki, leader of the first official kamikaze unit in October 1944, had achieved devastating success against escort carriers in Leyte Gulf. This was when proximity fuses comprised only 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition. By Okinawa, his successors faced a fundamentally different reality. Lieutenant Commander Goro Nonaka, leading the Thunder Gods Corps equipped with Oka flying bombs, lost his entire squadron on March 21, 1945. Not a single Oka reached launch position. American fighters guided by radar intercept officers shot down all 18 Betty bombers. But even if they had broken through, the wall of VT-fused anti-aircraft fire would have been impenetrable. The technical sophistication of the proximity fuse represented more than just superior manufacturing. The device embodied fundamental advances in electronics, material science, and systems integration that Japan could not match. The miniaturized vacuum tubes manufactured by Sylvania and Raytheon used special glass formulations that could withstand tremendous shock. The battery system, activated by the acceleration of firing, used an electrolyte that remained stable for months. Then it activated instantly when needed. The radio frequency was precisely calculated to minimize interference while maximizing detection range. Each element represented years of focused research backed by unlimited funding. Meanwhile, Japanese anti-aircraft defenses remained primitive. The Type 98 100mm anti-aircraft gun, Japan's best heavy AA weapon, still relied on mechanical time fuses requiring manual setting before each shot. Japanese naval vessels at Okinawa, including the super battleship Yamato during her final sortie, carried anti-aircraft ammunition technologically equivalent to what Americans had used at Pearl Harbor. When Yamato faced over 300 American aircraft on April 7, 1945, her 162 anti-aircraft guns fired thousands of rounds. They shot down fewer than 10 attackers. The Americans lost just 10 aircraft while sinking the world's largest battleship. This was a stark demonstration of technological disparity. The proximity fuse also enabled new tactical innovations impossible with conventional ammunition. American destroyers developed the VT umbrella technique. They fired proximity-fused shells in predetermined patterns above friendly ships under attack. The shells were timed to detonate at set distances. This created a protective dome of fragments that kamikaze aircraft had to penetrate. This technique proved particularly effective against Oka flying bombs. Their high speed made them nearly impossible to track with conventional fire control, but they remained vulnerable to the wall of fragments created by VT patterns. During the entire Okinawa campaign from April 1st sounding 21st to June 22, 1945, the United States Navy expended approximately 150,000 proximity-fused 5-inch shells. The effectiveness was undeniable. While VT-fused ammunition represented 45% of heavy anti-aircraft ammunition fired, it accounted for the vast majority of confirmed kamikaze kills at longer ranges. Time-fused shells, comprising 55% of ammunition expended, proved effective primarily at close range, where accuracy was less critical. The mathematics demonstrated that proximity fuses were approximately 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition against kamikaze attacks. The human cost differential was equally dramatic. Ships that exhausted their VT ammunition and reverted to time-fused shells suffered casualty rates significantly higher during subsequent attacks. The destroyer USS Drexler, attacked after expending her proximity-fused ammunition on May 28th, was sunk in less than a minute. 2 kamikazes that would likely have been destroyed by VT fire accomplished this. Her 158 dead represented more casualties than many destroyers suffered during entire campaigns while equipped with adequate proximity-fused ammunition. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet, experienced the kamikaze threat personally. His flagship USS Indianapolis was hit in March, forcing him to transfer to USS New Mexico, which was also struck in May. He later wrote, "This is my second experience with a suicide plane making a hit on board my own ship, and I have seen 4 other ships hit near me. The suicide plane is a very effective weapon, which we must not underestimate." Yet Spruance also recognized that without proximity fuses, the kamikaze would have been far more devastating. The VT fuse has saved countless ships and lives. It is the margin between bearable and unbearable losses. The strategic implications were clear to military planners preparing for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Intelligence estimates indicated that Japan had reserved approximately 10,000 aircraft for kamikaze attacks against the invasion fleet. However, American war planners, confident in proximity fuse effectiveness, calculated that defensive requirements could be met. Production of VT fuses was scheduled to reach 100,000 units daily by September 1945. New Mark 53 and Mark 58 fuses with improved sensitivity and reliability were entering mass production. The invasion fleet would have carried over 1 million proximity-fused shells. This would have created anti-aircraft defense unprecedented in military history. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 ended the war before this climactic test could occur. But the proximity fuse's impact on Japanese surrender calculations should not be underestimated. Japanese military assessments captured after the war acknowledged the impossibility of successful defense against an invasion fleet protected by what they called electronic shells. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, chief of the Naval General Staff, testified after the war that the Japanese Navy had calculated homeland defense kamikaze attacks would achieve less than 10% success rates against proximity-fused defenses. This was a rate that would make the tactic militarily worthless. Post-war analysis revealed the full scope of the proximity fuse achievement. The program had mobilized 112 companies in addition to main contractors. It created an industrial ecosystem dedicated to producing the most sophisticated military electronics of the era. British scientists who had conceived the original proximity fuse concept in 1940 but lacked resources for development acknowledged that American industrial capability had achieved what they considered impossible. The British had concluded that making vacuum tubes survive gun launch was insurmountable. American engineers proved them wrong. The effectiveness of proximity fuses against kamikaze attacks influenced military technology development for decades. The principle of smart munitions, weapons that could think for themselves, became central to American military doctrine. Modern anti-aircraft missiles use proximity fusing descended from the VT fuse. The Phalanx close-in weapon system protecting today's warships operates on principles pioneered during the defense against kamikazes. The technological superiority that defeated human guidance with electronic intelligence established a paradigm that continues to shape military strategy. Japanese veterans interviewed after the war expressed continued amazement at American proximity fuse technology. Commander Tadashi Nakajima, who helped establish the kamikaze program, admitted, "We knew the Americans had superior technology, but the proximity fuse was beyond our imagination. Our pilots reported shells exploding exactly where they flew, as if guided by invisible hands. It destroyed not just our aircraft, but the fundamental premise of the special attack, that spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage." Captain Eiichiro Joe, an early advocate of kamikaze tactics who survived the war, later reflected on the proximity fuse's impact. "We believed that the willingness to die would guarantee success. The American electronic fuse proved that technology could defeat even the most determined human sacrifice. It was not just a weapon, but a statement about the nature of modern warfare." The contrast between proximity fuses and kamikaze attacks represented fundamentally different philosophies about the value of human life and the role of technology in warfare. The American investment in preserving life through superior technology stood against the Japanese willingness to expend life as a weapon itself. The proximity fuse, by making kamikaze attacks survivable for American forces, invalidated the cruel logic that drove young Japanese men to deliberate death. In this sense, the electronic fuse represented not just technological superiority, but a moral statement about how wars should be fought. The legacy of the proximity fuse in defeating kamikaze attacks extends beyond military history. The crash development program that created the VT fuse established the model for subsequent American technical achievements from the space program to modern computing. The collaboration between universities, private industry, and military requirements that produced 22 million sophisticated electronic devices under wartime pressure demonstrated American organizational capabilities that would define the post-war era. The Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, where the proximity fuse was perfected, continued as a center of military technology innovation. It developed everything from guided missiles to satellite navigation. Dr. Merle Tuve, who led proximity fuse development, later reflected on the achievement. "We saved lives by making weapons more effective. Every kamikaze shot down by a proximity fuse meant American sailors who went home to their families. That was worth any amount of effort and expense." His team's success validated the American approach of applying scientific knowledge to military problems. This philosophy would dominate defense strategy throughout the Cold War. For the Japanese, the failure of kamikaze tactics against proximity-fused defenses marked the end of beliefs about spiritual superiority overcoming material disadvantage. The young pilots who died in futile attacks against walls of VT-fused explosions became symbols not of noble sacrifice, but of military leadership that had failed to recognize technological reality. Modern Japan's emphasis on technological development and innovation can be traced partly to the harsh lessons of 1945, when electronic fuses defeated human pilots with mechanical precision. The mathematical precision of the proximity fuse's success, 310 rounds per kill versus 1,162 for time-fused shells, translated into saved ships, preserved lives, and ultimately strategic victory. Each VT fuse that functioned correctly meant an American sailor who returned home. It meant a ship that survived to fight another day. It proved that technology could provide decisive advantage in modern warfare. The confirmed destruction of hundreds of kamikaze aircraft by proximity fuses before reaching their targets represented thousands of American casualties prevented, dozens of ships saved, and validation of the billion-dollar investment in electronic warfare. The story of technology defeating fatalism reached its climax in the waters off Okinawa. Radar-guided fighters, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, and sophisticated damage control systems prevailed against deliberate suicide attacks. The kamikaze pilots, brave young men sacrificed to a lost cause, flew into an electronic killing field their commanders never anticipated. Their deaths, while achieving tactical damage that horrified American sailors, failed to achieve the strategic goal of making invasion costs unbearable. The proximity fuse had transformed their sacrifice from devastating weapon to manageable threat. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal summarized the proximity fuse's contribution. "The proximity fuse has helped blaze the trail to Japan. Without the protection this ingenious device has given the surface ships of the fleet, our westward push could not have been so swift, and the cost in men and ships would have been immeasurably greater." This assessment, shared by military leaders throughout the Pacific Theater, recognized that electronic intelligence had defeated human sacrifice. The final accounting was sobering yet decisive. During the entire Okinawa campaign, Japanese kamikaze attacks sank 36 American ships and damaged 368 others. Terrible as these losses were, they represented survival of the vast majority of ships attacked. This survival rate would have been impossible without proximity fuses. The 4,907 American sailors killed by kamikazes at Okinawa, while representing the Navy's bloodiest battle, were a fraction of casualties that conventional analysis predicted without VT technology. Japanese losses were absolute. Approximately 1,100 aircraft and pilots were expended in organized kamikaze attacks during the 10 Kikusui operations. Hundreds more died in improvised suicide attempts. They achieved tactical results that fell far short of strategic requirements. The proximity fuse's victory over kamikaze attacks demonstrated that in modern warfare, technological superiority could overcome advantages in numbers, determination, or even willingness to die. The American sailors manning 5-inch guns with VT ammunition held decisive advantage over Japanese pilots sealed in cockpits for one-way missions. The miniaturized radio transmitter in each shell nose represented industrial capacity, scientific knowledge, and organizational capability that no amount of martial spirit could match. When the electronic fuse met the human pilot in the skies over Okinawa, the outcome was predetermined by factories in Cincinnati, laboratories in Maryland, and the fundamental American belief that technology could preserve life while achieving victory. The mathematical reality was inescapable. Proximity fuses weighing less than 5 pounds, containing 130 electronic components, manufactured for $18 by 1945 and functioning for less than 30 seconds, could destroy a kamikaze aircraft with its pilot. That aircraft represented years of training, tons of aluminum and steel, and, most tragically, a human life that could never be replaced. When multiplied across thousands of engagements throughout the Pacific Theater, this equation translated into American victory through technological superiority that helped determine the war's outcome. The proximity fuse's success against kamikaze attacks validated the entire American approach to warfare in the 20th century. Investment in technology, faith in industrial production, and belief that superior equipment could overcome fanatical determination proved correct in the most extreme test imaginable. For Japan, the failure of the kamikaze against proximity fuse defenses represented not just military defeat, but invalidation of core beliefs about spirit triumphant over matter. The electronic fuse had defeated the divine wind, proving that in the crucible of modern warfare, advanced technology would triumph over human sacrifice. The Pacific War demonstrated that in modern naval warfare, the ability to destroy aircraft at distance determined survival. Nations that could design, produce, and deploy superior defensive technology held decisive advantages over those relying on human courage alone. The proximity fuse versus kamikaze comparison illustrates this principle at the most fundamental level. American electronic sophistication, defeating Japanese human sacrifice, established technological superiority as the determining factor in military effectiveness. The contrast between American and Japanese approaches to anti-aircraft defense ultimately tells a larger story about industrial warfare in the 20th century. Nations that could marshal scientific knowledge, manufacturing capability, and organizational expertise to produce superior military technology held insurmountable advantages. The proximity fuse represented the culmination of American strengths: innovative engineering, mass production, and systematic problem-solving applied to military challenges. Its triumph over the kamikaze demonstrated conclusively that in modern war, victory belonged to those who could think, build, and deploy better technology. The mathematical precision of the proximity fuse's effectiveness, 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition, reducing required rounds per kill by 73%, preventing the loss of countless ships, translated into strategic victory that preserved American lives while defeating a determined enemy. This differential, multiplied across the vast Pacific Theater, helped secure American victory and established technological superiority as the foundation of post-war military doctrine. The electronic fuse had not just defeated the kamikaze. It had validated the entire American approach to warfare through superior technology. It proved definitively that in matters of life and death, Quality of equipment could overcome quantity of sacrifice.